Hey guys, welcome to today's class. We're going to discuss Chapter 8 in Microeconomics, which is behavioral economics, actually one of my favorite topics because it explains some of the oddities of why the market might not be perfectly efficient. So we'll get right started. Let me share these slides. Give me 1 second here. So just a quick update too on some of the current events in the world. We still are seeing turbulence from Ukraine. Basically some liquidity freezes, which is interesting, right? The decision to basically freeze their markets, might end up helping their markets because if they can prevent people from selling in order to wait until some kind of truce is formed, they'll protect a lot of the damage from the markets. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just making the case on, just what's happening in the world. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about systematic errors, the origin of behavioral economics, our efficient error-prone brains, prospect theory, myopia, and time inconsistency, and fairness and self-interest. Neoclassical economics, we believe our decisions are rational, but evidence shows we make systematic errors. We're not perfect, right? We don't think about things like robots. And behavioral economics, that's developed to explain these errors. Like, why do we have this? So next slide here. Neoclassical economics, people have stable preferences that aren't affected by context. People are eager and accurate calculating machines. Again, we know that's not true. People are good planners who possess plenty of willpower. People are almost entirely selfish and self-interested. Focusing on mental prowess behind decisions, that's behavioral economics. How do we frame things? Framing bias is actually one of the biases talked about. How do you frame a question, or how do you frame an argument can impact the outcome. Improving outcomes by improving decision-making is an important part of correcting these errors. So, one example could be if I buy something because I like it, I'll probably be bullish on that asset for longer than I rationally should be, because we tend to value things that we own more than things that we don't. Combining economic theories, viewing behavioral economics and neoclassical economics as complements. Neoclassical economics at the supermarket, behavioral economics at the supermarket, and complementary in explanations at the supermarket. So we'll talk about that a little bit here too. Major differences between behavioral economics and conventional neoclassical. So rationale, again, this is actually a great slide for a future quiz in terms of content. I might test you on a lot of potential multiple choice and true and false questions here. Effectively with rationality, the reality is people are irrational and make many errors that reduce their chances of achieving their goals. Some errors are regularly repeated in systematic errors, right? Stability of preferences. Again, behavioral economics, people's preferences are unstable and often inconsistent because they depend on context. Again, framing effects. People are bad at math and avoid difficult computations if possible, right? Give me the back of the napkin math. Show me the easy numbers, right? No one wants to dig into a huge balance sheet. They just want to see the output. And that's how financial fraud can occur. Ability to assess future options and possibilities. People place insufficient weight on the future events and outcomes. So, one example of that is, if you were analyzing Netflix as a stock in 2012 and you only looked at their past, you would have no idea of what their future value could be, because the future is going to be nothing like the past. There's, I forget the name of the theory. It's outside the scope of this chapter, but humans also tend to not account for, innovation. There were stories, 30 years ago about how there's only 20 years left of oil left in the world. And what happened, right? There was innovation. Strength of willpower. We talked about this a little bit in last class, but people lack sufficient willpower and often fall prey to temptation. And we talked about this, the statistic around this is that actually later in the day when we're tired is likely when our willpower is most reduced. And then selfishness. People are often selfless and generous in reality, right? And that would be a good trick question, right? Because everything else seems like kind of opposite, but this says people are selfless and generous, and neoclassical says we're all selfish and self-interested. And then fairness. For behavioral economics, many people care deeply about fairness and will often give to others, even when doing so will yield no personal benefits. Think about if you leave a tip at Dunkin' Donuts, and it's not even Dunkin' Donuts you regularly go to, right? That might be an example of, well, you want to be a good person. You're never going to see that person again, so you can totally ghost on that tip at Dunkin' Donuts and walk right out, or Starbucks, whatever. But why do you do it, right? Because you want to feel like you're being fair. Heuristics. This will definitely be a quiz term in the coming weeks. They're energy savers. It's like a rule of thumb. Catching a baseball with the gaze heuristic, riding a bicycle with steering heuristics, guesstimating ranks and recognition heuristics, implications of hardwired heuristics. These are actually terrible bullet points, but what I would say is when you think about heuristics, they're rules of thumb. If X happens, Y occurs, generally, right? Our efficient error-prone brains, brain modality, system 1 and system 2. So these are cognitive bias, confirmation bias. So let's dig into details on this. These will all definitely show up on a future exam. This chapter, in fact, let's tentatively schedule an exam for a week from today. That would be March 10th, 2022. Confirmation bias. That's going to be if you believe something. Let's say you abide by just one set of political beliefs. You're only going to look for and believe stuff that confirms your existing opinion, and you ignore information that you don't believe in, right? So that'd be confirmation bias. You only look for confirming information. It's like if you were a dictator, you only look for people who say yes. Self-serving bias, again, that's just selfish, effectively. Overconfidence bias, right? They actually say that men exhibit a higher overconfidence bias than women, according to some studies. Overconfidence bias basically thinks that we're better than we actually are, right? And that can cause people to stumble or make riskier bets when they shouldn't. And that's effectively the negative impacts of the overconfidence bias. Hindsight bias. That's like, oh yeah, I knew the pandemic was happening like first before anyone, right? But in hindsight, it's easy for me to say that. Hindsight bias is people who would say like, oh yeah, I already knew that, right? But again, easy. Or in sports, you see a football coach make a risky play at the end of the game to try to win the game, and they don't execute on it, and then they get criticized in the news the next day, but that was their only shot at winning. So, the media might say, oh, well, if I was the coach, I would have done something different. Well, easy to say now that you see a negative outcome. Availability heuristic. Good example here is like, let's say you only get your news from Facebook, right? You might be steered in a certain direction based on the algorithm. You're only looking at what's directly and readily available. You're not seeking out information. This is similar, but different than the confirmation bias, because you're, instead of only looking for confirming bias, you're looking for just what's right in front of you. So you're like, could be only reading the local paper, right? Planning fallacy. If we overplan, does that actually increase results, or does that end up being a waste of time? Framing effects. Framing effects is how you position something. I'm trying to think of like a less risky question I can pose with like a framing bias. But yeah, here's one. You know, if I called on a student and I said, hey, how bad do you think your grades are going to be this semester? What have I done with that question? I've already framed that you're not doing well. So by asking that question, I'm basically saying you're doing poorly, right? Without saying it. And now it's just a question of how poorly are you doing? Now I could have said, hey, what are your grades this semester? You know, and that would have been a question without bias. But asking how bad you're doing is a biased question that's framing an argument. It's often used in politics. Prospect theory, people judge good and bad things in relative terms as gains and losses to their status quo. People experience both diminishing marginal utility for gains as well as diminishing marginal disutility for losses. So, you know, for example, like if you're already homeless and you lose your car, you know, it sounds painful, but because you've already lost so much, it's actually not as painful. But on the upside too, diminishing marginal utility, if you go from, you know, 0 to 5 million, you gain a ton of utility. But when you go from 5 to 10 million, like sure, you're doing better, but it's not as impactful as that first 5 million. People also experience loss aversion in that they feel losses much more intensely than gains. So, you know, I have one client, for example, he hates that I sell anything for a loss. And he doesn't like seeing losses on the balance sheet, right? Like he doesn't so much, he wants it to go up, but his bias is more like not wanting to see red numbers. He would rather see a small green that underperformed the market than a red. So, you know, that can be a challenge. Losses and shrinking packages, framing effects and advertising. Anchoring is another bias. Right, and that sticks to that also correlates to the confirmation bias. So anchoring is, forget about credit card bills, but the anchoring bias effectively is the opinion that we're sticking to, or we only look at one original set of data and then we base all future decisions around that. Mental accounting, they're saying it relates to overpriced warranties because, you know, like, hey, you know, for $50 a year, we can warranty your AirPods and always replace them. But, you know, is that worth it? Or would you just be better off, like, when you lose or break your AirPods, just buying new ones, right? So that can come into place with mental accounting. Another mental accounting is like people who have assets in many different buckets, and they look at them as separate, like, oh, this is my risky account and this is my safe account. No, they're all one big aggregate account, right? The endowment effect in market transactions. Let me pull something up here. I'm going to show you guys probably a little video very quickly. And, you know, the endowment bias effectively is you value something that, again, you own more than something you don't, right? So if you think you own something and you think it's worth a lot of money, then you go to the market might tell you it's worth less, and you're like, no, I know it's worth more, right? But that's your bias, right? The market's going to tell you the price. Let me show you another video here. This one's called the hot hand fallacy. So let me switch screens here. And it was from a movie not that long ago.
Can a company help you live better?
Whoops, we have a little audio there. Hold on 1 second. So this is just a little fun video that explains the hot hand fallacy, right? And it's another one of these biases. So let me pause this and show you 1 second.
Okay, so here's how a synthetic CDO works. Let's say I bet 10 million on a blackjack.
10 million because this hand is meant to represent a single mortgage bond. Okay, Selena has a pretty good hand here, showing 18, dealer showing 7. That's a really good hand for Selena. Good odds. In fact, her chances of winning this hand are 87%.
So my odds are good. I'm on a winning streak. Everybody in this place wants to get in on the action. How could I lose, right?
Now, this is a classic error. In basketball, it's called the hot hand fallacy. A player makes a bunch of shots in a row. People are sure they're going to make the next one. People think whatever's happening now is going to continue to happen into the future. During the real estate boom, markets were going up, and people thought they would never go down.
So people who are watching and think that I won't lose will make a side bet. Now this is the first synthetic CDO.
I love Selena Gomez. Bet you 50 million she wins. And I'll give you 3-to-1 odds.
3-to-1 odds? Okay, I'll take that bet. Now, somebody else is going to want to make a bet on the outcome of their bet.
50 million she wins.
That will lead to synthetic CBO number 2.
Hey, I bet you 200 million that lady in the glasses wins that bet.
She probably will win. So I want great payoff.
How about 21?
Deal.
This will go on and on with more and more synthetic CDOs.
And we can transform an original $10 billion investment into billions of dollars.
Okay.
No. I actually feel pretty sick.
Well, guys, I realized I didn't share that screen. So you heard the explanation. It was from, I forget the movie, but we'll just stick with that explanation that we heard. If you want to see the video itself, if you just Google hot hand fallacy, Selena Gomez, it will show right up. We'll go back to those slides. So, the hot hand fallacy, again, explains, why people will get a potentially an overconfidence bias, right? You score 3 in a row, you think you're going to get the 4th. This is another bias, like in, percentage of people consenting to be organ donors. Why is this interesting? Well, the trick to getting people to be organ donors is to default them into it. So everyone defaults as to be an organ donor unless you choose no. You can tell in these countries right here, it's the opposite. You default as not to be an organ donor, and you have to opt in. There is actually similar studies with 401k plans. I think under the Obama administration, they changed the laws for retirement plans so that you defaulted as getting the retirement plan. Because if you said no, if it was default no, less people got in. Myopia and time inconsistency. So fighting self-control problems with pre-commitments. So when you think about myopia, let me put this up here, another little, myopia is like the inability to look forward in the future, right? So you just crave today and ignore tomorrow. How do you solve this problem? So if I'm talking to someone about some kind of basic retirement planning, automatic payroll deductions, salary smoothing. So if you get like a big bonus, your bias might be to just spend it right away. And then early penalty withdrawals. Do you get penalized for taking money out? That's a disincentive to do so. Fairness and self-interest. So evidence of fairness exists. So giving to charity, obeying the law. If you're at a red light, this talks about the selfish and only self-interested aspect. If you're at a red light and you look both ways, it's late at night, no one's coming. Do you run it? Most people don't, right? So that's what it's saying. Obeying the law is a good example of that. Purchasing fair trade products, like, maybe you're buying organic milk or some kind of free range eggs, food stuff comes to mind, guys. Sorry. Experimental evidence for fairness. There's a couple different games you can play. The dictator game, and then also the ultimatum game. I think I told you guys in the last class about the cheating story, right? How do players behave when they think they've been caught? Why the threat of rejection increases cooperation, implications for market efficiency. And the dictator game is an economic game that is designed to question the standard economic assumption that individuals will act solely out of self-interest. This is done by presenting real-life data and otherwise rational individuals acting out in a manner that runs counter to predictions of economics. So, if you're a dictator, are you going to, be a terrible, evil dictator, or are you going to try to be like a good person? And there's evidence to suggest that even under the dictator game, a lot of people will still behave relatively positively. UK established a behavioral insight team used to study nudging people towards choices are better for themselves and others. So again, the nudging of choices would be things like, again, defaulting you into a 401k plan, forcing you to take adult literacy classes, increased savings. They can be viewed as a form of manipulation, right? We're defaulting you to do something instead of not do it. So that is it for this chapter. Again, in that video I displayed that you only heard the audio of, also in it was a gentleman named Richard Thaler. So you know what I'll do? I'm going to play that one more time for you guys since I screwed that up, and we'll watch it one more time so you guys don't have to look it up. And it's from the movie The Big Short. So we'll just shut this down while the commercial plays for a second. So again, I think we'll have a quiz on chapters 5 through 8 next Thursday. That's what I'll shoot for. So here we go.
So here's how a synthetic CDO works. Let's say I bet 10 million on a blackjack.
10 million because this hand is meant to represent a single mortgage bond. Okay, Selena has a pretty good hand here, showing 18, dealer showing 7. That's a really good hand for Selena. Good odds. In fact, her chances of winning this hand are 87%.
So my odds are good. I'm on a winning streak. Everybody in this place wants to get in on the action. How could I lose, right?
Now, this is a classic error. In basketball, it's called the hot hand fallacy. A player makes a bunch of shots in a row. People are sure they're going to make the next one. People think whatever's happening now is going to continue to happen into the future. During the real estate boom, markets were going up, and people thought they would never go down.
So people who are watching and think.
So we'll stop there. That was essentially the lesson for today, guys. If you have any questions about the papers that you're going to be submitting, either the one I think that's due today or the one for next week, please don't hesitate to reach out and shoot me an email. And that's it. Hope you all have a great weekend. Have a great day.